So we'll make a start. Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Wright. I'm the Director of Membership and Communications at Bond. Delighted to be here hosting this session this afternoon. And we're going to be looking at taking control of international payments, understanding processes and fees, together with our long-standing partners, StoneX, who are experts in this field. This webinar comes about because we know a lot of our members have challenges around cross-border payments, how to go about finding a provider that will fulfill your needs for you, but also questions around getting the best rates. And we'll run through a lot of these questions as we go through the session today. So I'm glad to have the expertise of Joanna and Jean-Claude from StoneX here to help you. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. So if you want to ask a question, please pop it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll make a judgment as to whether to ask questions at the end of the session or whether we'll ask them directly in response to any of the comments that Joanna and Jean-Claude make. Today's session's being recorded, so we'll share a recording of the presentation after the meeting, and the slides will be on the Bond website and in the post-event email. So no need to sort of take notes. We'll send those through to you as soon as the session's finished. Captions are available, and you can turn them on if needed using the show captions button at the bottom of the screen. There will be a feedback form posted in the chat towards the end of the discussion, and we really love you can fill this out, because we are running a series of events with StoneX. So if there's other things that you would like them to cover, we're more than welcome to take your advice on this. So yeah, delighted to be working with Joanna and Jean-Claude and StoneX, and I'm going to give the floor to Joanna to take us through this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. I hope you find this session valuable, and as Mike said, please do feel free to ask questions as and when they pop to mind. So again, we're going to be discussing taking control of your international payments and really understanding the processes and fees behind these payments. Firstly, I'd like to actually just introduce Jean-Claude and I and what we do at StoneX. So we both work on the sales desk here in London. I look after clients that are based in the UK and Switzerland, so charitable clients and UN agencies that have payments to process that are based in the UK and Switzerland is what I look after. And Jean-Claude, who actually does correspondent banking and sales. So he actually speaks to our local banks all around the world, and he also looks after charities and UN agencies across Europe. So a little bit about us, and I will start by just giving you a bit of background about StoneX Payments. If I can get this to work. Sorry about that. Yes, so StoneX have been around for over 35 years in the payment space. We've got a real robust knowledge of the markets that we currently work in. We are active in all over Africa, Asia, and South America. We're able to process payments in over 180 countries in 140 currencies. And the way that we do this that I guess makes us quite unique is we have local banking partners on the ground. Jean-Claude will go into this a bit later in the session, but we have over 350 correspondent banks all over the world that we've partnered up with to enable us to get very competitive pricing and to deliver funds to your beneficiaries as quickly as possible. We have access to the wholesale rates, and we're also the first non-bank to join the SWIFT Global Payments Initiative. We have round-the-clock coverage, and we speak to our correspondent banks on a daily basis. So we really do understand these markets. We really understand, where the rates are derived from. We understand how each market works. If there's anything happening within that country, we're kind of the first ones to know. So we really are an expert in this field. All over Africa, Asia, and South America. And another thing that I guess makes us a little bit different is we don't actually hold client funds. We use our own funds to process these payments, and we ask our clients to reimburse us on the value date of the transaction. So your funds will never be at risk. You get very competitive pricing and very quick delivery. And here is now a screen of the market coverage that the countries and currencies that we're able to process funds to. So as you can see, there's a very varied jurisdiction around all of the countries and currencies we're able to do. And it has taken over 30 years to really develop these relationships and understand exactly how they work. We have an office in New York, Singapore, and London, so we are able to cover all of these countries 24/5. We have a dedicated correspondent banking team and a dedicated client management team to really help you with all of these countries and currencies. I'll pass it over to Jean-Claude now.
Hi everyone. A pleasure to virtually meet you. I'll basically go through, perhaps what you experience when you do make those cross-border payments for your projects. It could be, I think, because sometimes the process is perceived to be almost mystified. Some organizations don't know exactly, where fees are being deducted, where that cost, where sometimes, the cost in making those payments, cross-border payments, arise from. And generally, that is because most organizations they tend to send hard currencies, and hard currencies we're meaning mainly the top three currencies in the world, which are the dollars, sterling, and euros. And this slide here you're looking at kind of shows exactly how such payments are channeled when you are making a sterling payment. And because ultimately, let's say here the example we have is for a UK-based organization that is making a payment to Kenya, and let's say they're choosing it to make it in sterling, and as you can see, it goes through multiple channels. And what you have is that that organization would go through, they would use their own bank, their own high street bank. And that bank would probably would send it on maybe to another bank, because for that payment to go through, so in the case the local bank in Kenya has let's say a GBP account, and the bank in Kenya would hold a sterling account with a bank in the UK. And let's say that bank in the UK is not the same bank as the bank, the organization, the sender organization holds a bank account with. It means there's a payment that's being made from that end, and then that bank in this case maybe is making the payment to another bank, and then there's a conversion that takes place once that payment reaches Kenya. In the event, of course, mostly, as you would know, the main currency in Kenya is the Kenyan shilling, and that is the currency that is widely used, which is reflected in, I would say, 90% of the countries around the world. Most countries don't use the sterling as their main currency. They don't use the dollar as their main currency. They don't use the euro as their main currency. 90% of the countries outside the US, Europe, and UK, of course. So yes, so that gets converted, and here you can see at each step, usually there's a fee that is deducted. There's a fee that has been deducted when you've made that payment, because it's an international transfer, and it could be that at each step as well that the intermediary banks that you see there take a fee as well. But now, you could perhaps look at maybe already 30-40 pounds has been deducted minimum, perhaps on that payment. But then there is a bigger cost to it, actually, and that biggest cost is in the exchange rate. When the beneficiary bank, in this example Kenya, converts those sterling into Kenyan shilling, because if the recipient in Kenya has a Kenyan shilling account, it means that once the sterling hits the account in Kenya, it gets converted straight away. And it's the beneficiary bank in Kenya that would be responsible for that conversion. And most of the time, the sending party doesn't have any idea or as to what exchange rate is being applied. Because what tends to happen is that the local bank, their benefit basically is to, because they do have imports from in this case, from the UK, and so they do need sterling, and the exchange rate that they would give, they would give for that transaction would be more beneficial for their corporate customers than your than your partner on the ground, and so they almost kind of charge anything they want, and sometimes they tend to do that because they know an NGO organization is almost like a captive customer. So really, I think that's when organizations are sending, let's say, hard currencies, that tends to be the way it is done. So you can see it is lengthy because it's going through multiple chains. It is costly, and also sometimes you don't know exactly through which. There is no real visibility as to how many chains it is going through sometimes. So that is basically how sometimes it can appear as opaque when an organization makes a payment to those jurisdictions in hard currency. Would you have any? So there'll be questions later on this. So we'll move on to the next slide. Yes. So, I mean, this slide here basically kind of what you see, the bullet points here, they kind of highlights what I just stated in terms of how. So when you make a payment in hard currency, it has to go through an intermediary bank. There's an unknown exchange rate. There's local conversion, and I mean that risk of fraud is quite interesting actually, because what it means sometimes is that the sending organization or the sending organization doesn't really have any visibility. Let's say you're sending $1. Again, a country like Kenya, there are dollar accounts there. I mean, the local partners can have sterling account, but mainly I would say it would be dollar accounts. But then if ultimately those funds need to be converted in Kenyan shilling, because that's what the operational cost of the partner organization or of your local office is in local currency, it would mean that somebody within, I'm not sharing that's you, but what from experience, what we have found out is that somebody would be responsible for going outside of the markets or the official markets and converting the dollars into local currency, and that doesn't always get reported in the correct way. But by doing it the way, by sending hard currency, so there is a risk of that, but by sending local currency, basically, you have a better control of that in terms of, there's a better audit and there's a better transparency. There's better visibility in terms of, what is being done with the funds that you're sending. Yes, I mean, as Joanna said, I mean, we've been doing this for the past 30 years, but we don't say that we are the best in everything, and we always tell our clients where you can you don't just rely on one provider. You can use a bank and a provider like us. I mean, we've been doing this. We do this on behalf of as Joanna mentioned, UN agencies, quite a number of large UK organizations. But that doesn't mean that we don't want you perhaps to do your comparison and see and find out what the best, which provider would provide with the best value. But then there are a number of considerations you should take, especially when it comes to making payments in those. To Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and so when you look at a provider, ask them those few questions because that will allow you to know exactly whether they are able to do what they do and really service you in the way that they should. So, and one question to ask, how do they process payments locally? Do they have, like us, we have, as Joanna said, we have a local network of banks we work with. So we're kind of onshore, and we do a local due diligence with the banks. And essentially, we're using local clearing systems. When we make a payment, let's say to Brazil, for example, we would know exactly. We would request certain information that would make us that would enable us to make the payment locally. So we're quite specific in terms of what we require for the payment for us to be able to track the payment and for us to ensure that the payments get delivered on time. Do they have local market knowledge? Can they tell you what is happening on the ground? I mean, an example I can give you, for example, is a few years ago. I mean, it also happened recently when there was a significant devaluation of the Ethiopian birr. What we did, I know other parties did the same, but we were aware of this, and we were telling our clients, okay, this is about to happen, so be aware of this. And we told them, I think in some cases, we told them to not trade on that day because there was so much volatility. Because it was not going to be to their benefit, and so would your provider be able to provide you with that information? Do they have access to that information? And also, what do they do with that information? How honest and transparent are they? And yes, can they ensure a timely delivery? So what and provide you an exchange rate up front? Timely delivery, it really comes to having a robust infrastructure and being able to use the local clearing systems. It could be the local RTGS, local ACH system. What kind of access do they have in those countries? Can they guarantee you an exchange rate? Can they guarantee that the full amount will be delivered without any deductions? Those are the questions that you should ask as well. And also, yes, are they putting your funds at risk if you pay first? For us, we take on, when we make a payment, we don't wait for any of our clients to pay us first. We actually use our own funds. One is because we understand those markets, we understand we understand the markets. We understand the counterparties, our local counterparties, and that's why we're able to do that. And so you should ask the same questions as well from your providers. If they're asking you to pay them £10,000 first before they make the equivalent amount in Kenyan shilling, that means they're using your funds. So that's something you should ask as well. What is their credit worthiness? And yes, so these are things that you should consider to make that choice. And yeah, again, what are they charging? Are there any fees that you're not aware of? Yes, so do make sure that these things are I would say are clear upfront before you choose a provider. And also, I think what is important is also speak to other providers, sort of to other to other members of the sector. So ask references from NGOs that operate in similar jurisdictions, because they would also have an idea of how they would be able to tell you how they're doing things, where things are going wrong, and where things can improve. So that tends to be, I think, more heads are better than one, basically. And from the same provider, if you can, do ask them if they can provide you with references. I think that's also quite important, because it would mean that they understand your sector. It would mean that they understand how you operate. Because for us, for example, we were kind of set up to service the sector. That's our genesis. But do ask the same thing from them. How do they understand you? Do you understand your approval process? Do you have systems that can accommodate how you function as an organization? So I think those are the important there are key points to also ask those providers.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. So please share any questions that you may have. We'd be very happy to help.
We've got a question here from Josephine Rogers. I don't know whether we need more detail to answer this question, but it would be Josephine asks, as a non-profit organisation, paying people to do work for us in India has become something of a nightmare. What advice can you give? Are you able to help with that? And also, just to say that Jean-Claude and Joanna are really good at answering the nitty-gritty questions about individual currencies. So if you do have sort of individual problems, then please raise them here. We're more than happy to kind of cover them off. So yeah, what about payments to India? What problems can you see there, Jean-Claude or Joanna? How might they be overcome?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Josephine. I mean, there was a change in regulation in India, I think it was early last year, which made it kind of difficult for certain payments to be made. I mean, I think even on our side, I think we had to change a few things, now we haven't had any issues. Just to say that we are aware of the issues that take place. What it is basically for us when we make payments to India, it all basically depends on the kind of purpose code that needs to be provided for that payment. So yeah, again there, so we by corresponding with with our correspondent bank, we do have all those purpose of payment code on file to make sure that when an organization or a client comes to make a payment, that they are able to select the right purpose of payment code and for that payment to go through. So yes, so we are aware, but I think in the past, I would say year or so, we haven't had such issues in making payments to India in Indian rupee.
Right, thank you. And Josephine, if you need to ask any more about the answer, please pop it in the Q&A. Leslie has asked a question about well, two questions actually. Firstly, the complex flowchart that you presented about how it all works. She's asking whether the StoneX flowchart would look different. Am I understanding it correctly that there are only 3 banks involved, or 3 steps involved: the UK NGO, the local bank, and the INGO bank?
Exactly, and that's exactly how it works. So yes, so how to give you an example of our of a transaction flow or a payment flow for a client that uses us, using the same example of Kenya. Yeah, so we would have a platform. We have a platform that our clients connect to. So they come to us anytime. They can come at any time. They say they want to make a payment to Kenya. We contact our bank. We provide them with an exchange rate. Let's say if the client accepts, then we start a process of making the payment, usually in 2 days. What has happened here is that we have confirmed the exchange rate and the full amount. So the sending organization would know exactly how much is being sent and how much it's costing them. What we then do is that we send that payment on to our bank in Kenya. So that's one payment basically, and so that's one transaction flow, and that bank in Kenya receive an instruction to make the payment to any bank in Kenya that operates in the Kenya clearing system, using a local clearing system. Yes, so that completely diminishes the transaction flow when it comes to our modus operandi.
Yeah. You need a smaller flow chart to show the StoneX journey next time. And Leslie's got a question specifically about her current FX provider won't send currency to Burundi. Does StoneX require a certain number of transactions per year? Would you be able to do a few transactions per year? How does it work from your side?
So there is no minimum or maximum transaction amount, or however many transactions you decide to put through us a year or a month, or it really depends on you. We don't actually have a time that you have to use us. We have our standard terms of business and due diligence documentation, which we obviously kindly ask you to complete. And once that's done, we set you up on the platform. It's free of charge. We don't charge any costs or anything to be set up. You could do one payment through us, and if you don't like us, you don't have to use us again. There is no minimum amount as well. So, I mean, I know I've had some clients that have put £10 through before, and I have some that have put £2 million through. And I guess the difference in terms of the rate is we package our payments together before we approach the local bank. So, for example, if we have a UN agency that's sending £2 million and we've got a smaller UK organisation that's sending £10,000 or something like that, we would package them together before we approach the local bank. So the bank will then give us a very competitive price, because we're not just going with that 10,000, we're going with that 2 million, which then enables us to provide you, the client, a very competitive price.
To add, I think Burundi, to also come back to that question, which is a good question, because Burundi is a difficult country, and I think also is a country that shows how it's important to have a provider, that has a good knowledge, and it's a good knowledge, local knowledge, and has developed that robust infrastructure. So in Burundi, I would say just around it was probably around 2017 or 2016, there were sanctions put on Burundi, and it was very difficult to make payments there, or the regulator or the Bank of Burundi put all the restrictions. So you had banks, you had the global banks that didn't want to make payment to Burundi, but also because of sanctions being put on the government following the political upheaval there. The local banks or the local regulator also reacted in a way that restricted payments there. But because of our, we were able to make the argument to Burundi, to the Burundian government that, that there are important projects or important projects that are taking place there, and that they should facilitate payments to Burundi. And so we went to Burundi, we spoke to local stakeholders, and we received the approval to continue processing payments to Burundi. So our service to Burundi was really never interrupted. So yeah, we can make payment to Burundi with no issues. And as Joanna said, there is no restriction on the amount as to we don't tell our clients you need to send this much. You need to send this much for us to make the effort of facilitating that for you. I mean, for us, we set up currencies. Even if one small client sends a payment to, I don't know, could be Vanuatu, we would probably go out there and try to set up the relationship, which we did. Same for us. So because we understand the NGO sector, yes, and we want to be a partner for the sector. So to answer the question, yeah, no issues at all for making such payments to Burundi.
Great, thanks, Jean-Claude. I'm just going to, there's a set of questions here, but I'm going to just move down to Zarina's question, because I know from experience that actually some of our smaller members struggle, generally with banking services, and quite often, I mean, in the past, that's probably still the case. So, organisations are using the normal high street banks to try and affect some of these things, but just and this may or may not be the case with Zarina, but she's asking about, she supports a small charity working with local partners in Burkina Faso. We've had issues sending money through our UK bank. It takes months for the funding to reach the partner bank and only happens when we recall the money. We found out that there are intermediary banks. The most we send in a single transaction is around 3k. I've been told by other organisations that our transactions are too small to be a client. What would you advise for Zarina in her circumstances?
Yeah, really, I think when looking at the providers, really it's because you Sabrina would already have that experience. If you're looking for a provider, you should ask them those questions. Are you actually able to make payments? What's it going to cost me? I mean, for us, they probably what happens when her organization is a payment to Burkina Faso, it's probably, there's a bank here in the UK, The bank in the UK since probably converts the sterling into euros. The euros goes to a bank in France. That French bank sends them on to Burkina Faso, and then they're converted into CFA when it goes through, probably. But no, for us, it's a very straightforward currency, making payments to Burkina Faso. And what it will mean for her is that for her organization, the only transaction that she would probably do is the sterling transactions to our sterling account. We're taking care of the other side of making the payment into Burkina Faso. So for each transaction there are two legs. One, of course, is when we get reimbursed in 2 days or on a valid date, but the responsibility, our responsibility of delivering the payment to Burkina Faso is ours, which we guarantee upfront.
Yeah. Yes, and it's I think it's probably worth saying there are so many kind of, as the chain gets shorter, the number of people taking a cut is also reduced, isn't it? That's right?
Exactly, and I mean to the point she made on how it takes a lot of time, and also that the funds get returned. For us, I mean, it does happen that a local recipient might say funds haven't been received, or maybe also it could be that due to a system issue in Burkina Faso, which just happened, that the funds haven't gone through. So, but we're able to track that. We don't need to go through a bank, which bank, and then the bank goes to another bank before finding out what the issue is. We can contact our bank in Burkina Faso straight away to find out what the issue is and provide us with the status of the payment. And the same thing if a payment was to be returned, we don't charge. There's no extra charge to that. Meaning that we would await for the instructions of our client to tell us what they want to do for a payment to Burkina Faso, at least what they want to do. But let's say if they want to make the payment again to the same beneficiary, maybe with corrected instructions, we don't charge that. There's no cost at all. There's no investigation cost. We would that transaction will have the same conditions, meaning the amount, the guaranteed amount will remain the same, the exchange rate will be the same, and we would deliver that as per the instructions.
Thank you. And it's sort of it's worth saying that our experience, the experiences we hear from members are that currently there are constant funding challenges for organisations large and small. So they keeping hold of as much of the money that you've brought in and not losing it through not having a good FX provider is crucial. So I think my advice to all of you on the call would be to sort of consider what you're doing now and review it. And if you need to get advice from Joanna or John-Claude to talk to them, because there's no point in acquiring the money and then seeing it sort of eroding in front of you. So I'd recommend that. I just want to sort of move on to a slightly different tack and go to the sort of next question, which is really about getting money directly to partners or suppliers in countries where banking restrictions apply. And I know one of our working groups specifically mentioned about making payments to organisations in Afghanistan. Can you just give people a bit of a sort of an overview of those sort of really difficult countries, conflict-affected countries, and how you operate in those sorts of spaces and the challenges there?
Of course. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, Afghanistan at this time is a country where we can't make direct payments to. It's something that is being worked on, and I think once that it is live, hopefully we'll be able to share that news. But what I would say is that we do operate in high risk. We do make payments to high risk jurisdictions, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Yemen, whether it's I think all the other except the ones that are under comprehensive sanctions. we tend to not have restrictions in terms of who we pay to, as long as the recipient has a bank account in a bank that is not under sanctions. Because sometimes you do have banks, of course, that have owners that are listed in the various sanctions regimes. But yeah, no, I mean, there are a few, in some countries we don't make payments to individuals, but it's mainly, or we do require a pre-approval, and that's mainly for the Caribbean. But I would say for the high-risk jurisdictions where NGOs make payments to, we do not have restrictions on making payments to suppliers or local partners, or even sometimes, making direct salary payments. We don't have. But what I would say to that organization is, sometimes it could be that we need to maybe ask exactly in that country what the situation is. But we are always, when we get asked such a question, if we don't know it or if it's something new, we are able to get information on the day from our local correspondent as to what is possible, what is not. But I think, as I said, from an NGO perspective, there hasn't been any restrictions to suppliers or partners, unless, of course, they are listed somewhere on the or if we screen that payment and maybe that payment gets a hit, of course, then we wouldn't be able to make that payment as well, because we need to go through our own due diligence.
Great, thank you. And just we've got a question about sending payments in local currency, but kind of just broaden that out and ask you when is it better to send dollars or sterling or euros or local currency to a project? What are the factors? What is one of those the best way, or are there different circumstances in which you would use different currencies to send to a project?
I think
I think it really depends on the country and the currency that you're processing these payments to. Obviously, we'd encourage you to process these payments when the market's open in that country. So try and send the funds within that time frame. And I think if there is anything, as Jean-Claude mentioned, if there is anything going on within that country, or if there's something within the government or something that's actually going to affect sending the funds there, or getting not a very good price, we would always mention this to you. Or if there's a holiday in the country as well, we would tell you, it's closed, so it's not worth, don't send funds to that country today. And on our platform, it actually says to you, if it's closed or if there's a holiday, you won't actually be able to even process that payment. So I think it really, really depends case by case per currency, and when the markets are open.
Yes, and I would say to add to that as well is, I mean, there are countries that are dollarized. For example, DRC is one of those. You have Liberia, you have sometimes Cambodia, and some countries in the like El Salvador. And I mean, for example, I wouldn't, even though we make payments to Lebanon in local currency, when a client comes to me asking whether to make LBP, I'll tell them, yes, you can, but if you want to send dollars, it'd probably be better for you. So we're very honest. Yeah, we're very honest, because there are, because it's a good question, because there are countries where it makes more sense to send hard currency rather than local currency because of the local market conditions. But yeah, to Joanna's point, it really depends on the country. It mainly depends on the country, but I would say, a good 80-90% of the countries outside of the US, Europe, and UK, it's best to send local currency, because ultimately, if you know it's going to be converted in local currency anyway, you are able to know if you're still sending sterling, knowing that it's going to be converted anyway, you're going to lose a significant percentage of that. So it's up to you to make that evaluation, I would say. Yeah, but it's best if you know it's going to be converted in local currency. If you know that the currency of the recipient is a local currency account, I would say it makes no sense for you to send sterling, euros, or dollars.
Okay. Right, that's good advice. And obviously, lots of NGOs are funded by donors, institutional grants. So are donors completely out of the picture? Do they try and influence the way NGOs what currencies are used, or how flexible and how forgiving are donors in their sort of attitude towards the way money is converted?
No, good question. I think for us, I think here I would perhaps I think it depends on the organization, also on the size of the organization. I think here I would perhaps defer to some of our larger organizations, a part of the DEC, who perhaps get those questions. But what I do see definitely, what I've seen anyway, is that they want more transparency. You know, they're kind of risk averse. They want to make sure that there are AML controls, that maybe the local office, in terms of their operations, it can be fully audited, or as audited as well as possible. And really, that can only be done when you know what is being used on the ground. And knowing that, if you know what is used on the ground is in local currency, if you don't know what the numbers are, it's difficult for you to be able to account to that. Yes, that would be my answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. I've got a sort of an interesting question here, which is about money coming in the other direction. So it's an unnamed attendee who says, very occasionally, one of our local partners in Uganda and Sierra Leone might need to send us a payment to the UK. Our current FX provider wasn't able to do this. Would an INGO in Africa be able to send a payment to a charity in the UK? How does that work, and what advice would you give there?
So we're not able to do that. Only, and really, because and also I think if you have providers that say usually they can do that, it means there are question marks, because we say we don't do that because we're not in most of those countries. You need to have an onshore license to buy local currency from other parties other than banks. So which we're not. So we don't do that. What I would say, or what I know that some organizations do, is that, you know, if they have agreements, or if they work with other organizations that work there, they tend to find an arrangement where maybe that organization would use those funds, and then in the UK they find a way to match that. That's what I know what some organizations do. Yeah, but for us, yeah, the only countries where we can facilitate that are right now, I would say it's mainly Brazil and Colombia. But all the other ones, you know, we don't do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And a question about sort of rates, and when people contact you, you normally give us an indicative rate. Is there some way of providing a guaranteed rate? How does quoting on rates work, and how is it right at that moment, or can rates be held? How does that sort of the rates function operate?
Sure. So for us, we have an in-house built platform called fExecute, which enables the organization to log on, request a rate, let's say a rate for Kenyan shilling against sterling. So they say, let's just say £10,000. They'd like to get £10,000 into Kenya against pounds. Our traders would give them a live upfront exchange rate, and our cost is included in that rate. So the rate is upfront, the amount is upfront. So if they accept that rate, we do everything in the background. We process the payment directly into their beneficiary account in 2 working days. They reimburse us the sterling on the value date. There's no hidden costs, no hidden fees. That is the rate, that is the amount, and it's derived from the local market, from our local banks.
Great, thanks, Joanna. Sort of, and I want perhaps move to sort of final bits of advice in a way. So just thinking about you know, the sort of the chain, the kind of payment, getting to the sort of end point with the money. How are there any sort of practices that you can recommend to people about how they might mitigate the risk of any incurring any extra costs? What do people need to do in their thinking to be able to sort of ensure they don't inadvertently incur transaction costs or other costs that what's your advice around that about sort of transaction hygiene?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Jean-Claude mentioned earlier, I think you just really need to know the provider that you're using. You need to know how they're processing these payments. You need to know where they're getting their pricing from, how they're getting their pricing. You know, are they using local markets? Who are they using? And you need to make sure that, you know, when you are provided an exchange rate, that really is the cost of that transaction. And there isn't any hidden costs or fees that are going to be taken along the way, or you know, when the beneficiary is credited, is there going to be any fees deducted once the account's credited? And I think you just really need to understand exactly how that process is being handled from start to finish, and ask the questions. Do you speak to local banks on the ground? Is the rate you're providing me the exact amount that's going to be credited? How can you ensure that this definitely is the cost and nothing else is going to be deducted along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's applying the same mindset that already exists within an organization. Because, for example, if I'm an organization that fights against malaria, I'm used to going out there and finding the best, you know, malaria mosquito nets. And I think there are a number of conditions I apply to it, and really it's applying the same thing to finding an FX provider. You know, it's I think there are criteria, I think, which Joanna just mentioned, and making sure you're the best. You're finding the provider that best suits your needs and your operations. Yeah, I think it's mainly that, but also I know it's very tricky, especially now because there are many providers out there. You know, finding out the right ones. You know, and again, I think, you know, which is, you know, there are platforms like Bond, but also other organizations out there that operate around. So yeah, asking references, you know, as to, you know, how they're doing it, what their experiences are. And if you find a provider that is able to answer your questions to a satisfactory level, I think maybe, they are the right ones for you. But what I would say is that those questions you're asking in terms of, you know, the fees, costs, chains, those are the right questions to ask your provider. If they can't answer them, then I don't think they're the right ones.
And also, you know, the proof really is in the pudding. Maybe do a test payment with 2 different providers and see which service works out better. Sometimes that is the best way to really see how a provider works, instead of, you know, I mean, a lot of people can say, oh, we can do this and we can do that, but if you actually take a payment to them and take a payment to someone else and compare them, and you can really see exactly the delivery, the service, the cost is all included.
And just somebody in the questions earlier, obviously talking about a payment getting stuck and then not realizing that it never arrived. That seems to be a reasonably common experience. Again, how would you test that out with any provider that they've got that, you know, the links that takes it through to the end of the chain?
Yeah, I think to test that, if that happens, which as I said, it happens with us as well, is what is that provider able to tell you, and how quickly they're able to respond to you. Yeah, it's true, because you really test something once you see when something is going wrong, basically. So how communicative are they? Can they tell you, you know, which bank they use locally? Can they tell you what local clearing systems they will use locally? What kind of confirmation can they provide you? Yeah, those are the questions to ask. Yeah, so we do face these issues, but it's also having a team, having an infrastructure that can handle those issues, because ultimately No, those markets, those countries are not easy. I mean, making a payment to Sudan, where there's going undergoing civil war, we're doing that, but we know things can happen. But if it happens, what kind of feedback can we give our client? These type of things. So yeah, we you would know basically, as to how quick, how reactive they are, and also. I think that the example that was given earlier about funds being lost for 3 months, that's just I mean, you can imagine the impact on the partner. That's yeah. So no, it's basically how they react, how they communicate, and it comes to the other questions. Which kind of what is the local network? What is their local network? How do they clear payments?
Yeah. So I think we've come to an end of a really interesting, fascinating session. Thank you for all your questions, and thank you so much to Joanna and Jean-Claude for answering them. If you have further questions, please contact Joanna or Jean-Claude, and they'll be happy to answer your questions. I think the my advice is to everybody is to just do an MOT check on your FX provider, and make sure that they're able to answer some of the questions that Joanna and Jean-Claude were suggesting you ask, and it's don't waste the precious funds that you've got, because you can easily lose them through poor choice of provider. I really like to thank you again to Joanna and Jean-Claude, and we'll be meeting again with StoneX in the future. Really appreciate them as partners, and thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye.